In the summer of 1877, rumors began circulating that a young engineer in New Jersey had invented a talking machine. At first, the difficulty most professionals had in believing such a story prevented it from becoming news. That changed in December when the young man walked into the office of the Scientific American and placed before the editors a small, simple machine. Without offering much of an explanation, the visitor simply turned the crank and, to the astonishment of all present, the machine said, "Good morning, how do you do? How do you like the phonograph?" Invented by Thomas Edison, the phonograph was the first device to both record and replay sound, and it quickly became a sensation. In the following months, Edison's secluded laboratory at Menlo Park was flooded with journalists, and his public demonstrations of the device drew enormous crowds. All those who heard it, from the President of the United States on down, reacted with disbelief. There was something of an almost occult nature about a machine that could talk, and that could one day even revive the voices of the dead. The 1800s aren't usually remembered through sound. While photographs allow us to see this century more vividly than any before it, the stern-faced Victorians stare back at us in silence from their portraits. It was only in the 20th century that the phenomenon of playing back voices became so common that we take it for granted. But the technology to do so existed far earlier, allowing us to listen to the distant echoes of people who lived centuries ago. This video is dedicated to the oldest voices that can still be heard. The first words ever spoken into the phonograph were the opening lines of the nursery rhyme "Mary Had a Little Lamb." Made by Edison himself, this recording is unfortunately no longer preserved. But even if it were, it wouldn't be the oldest one ever made. Because what Edison had really pioneered was the playback of sound. He wasn't the first to record it. Already in the 1850s, a Frenchman called Edward Leon Scott de Martinville had developed a device that could inscribe airborne sounds onto paper coded in lampblack. Known as the phonautograph, it was made to automate the process of writing down speech. And so its recordings, called phonautograms, were never supposed to be played back. They were meant to be read. A printer and bookseller by trade, Leon Scott was interested in stenography and believed that the lines traced by his machine embodied a form of natural shorthand that could one day be deciphered and read by eye, just like text or sheet music. Unlike a human stenographer, the phonautograph would write down everything that was being said instantaneously, including the way words were pronounced, and it never made any mistakes. But despite his efforts, Scott never succeeded in deciphering his recordings, and the machine instead found use as a laboratory instrument for the study of acoustics. For 150 years, collections of his work lay silent and forgotten in various French institutions, until in 2007 a number of them were rediscovered by an American team of researchers. The following year, they used high-resolution digital scans to convert one of the phonautograms into an audio file. What they found on it was humanity's first playable recording of its own voice. It features part of the French folk song Au clair de la lune and was made in 1860, a year before the outbreak of the American Civil War, at a time when France was still ruled by Emperor Napoleon III. Initially, it was thought to be sung by a woman or a child, but the researchers leading the project later found that their misunderstanding about an included reference frequency had resulted in a doubling of the correct playback speed. When slowed down, the recording instead reveals the voice of Scott himself, singing slowly and deliberately into his machine. Probably made shortly afterwards, another of Scott's phonautograms contained the opening lines of a 16th century play called Aminta by the Italian poet Torquato Tasso. This is the earliest known recording of intelligible human speech. In Scott's last known phonotogram, dated to late September 1860, he sings once again, but this time a much more lively song. It has been identified as La Chanson de l'Abeille, the Song of the Bee, from the comic opera La Reine Topaz by Victor Massey. It was first performed in 1856, just 4 years earlier. In collaboration with the instrument maker Rudolf Koenig, Scott managed to sell several dozen phonotographs to scientific laboratories and to schools, but he never made much money from his machine. In 1878, he was devastated when Thomas Edison received accolades from around the world for the invention of the phonograph, while his own work of 20 years earlier was ignored by the press. He wrote in his memoirs that, quote, "I ask for only one reward for my efforts, to not forget to pronounce my name in this matter, for I am getting old, the father of 2 sons, and all I can leave them is my good name." Leon Scott died the next year in 1879 at the age of 62. Left without funds or pension, his family was forced to yield his remains to an unmarked grave. His final resting place remains unknown. Although the phonograph won Edison worldwide fame, a lot of work remained to be done before it could be turned into a commercially viable product. One major problem was that it recorded sound by making indentations on tinfoil. This fragile material was prone to tearing and would wear out after just a couple of playbacks. As a result, the few tinfoil recordings that remain can't be played back with a stylus without seriously damaging them. But just like with Scott's phonograms, they can be optically scanned and then played back digitally. This has been successfully done in a couple of cases, like the following recording from 1878. It opens with a 23-second cornet solo of an unidentified song, followed by a man's voice reciting popular nursery rhymes. The sound quality is very poor, but you can just about make out "Mary Had a Little Lamb" and "Old Mother Hubbard", as well as the man's loud bursts of laughter. According to some articles, he messes up the words at the end and says, "Look at me, I don't know the song." This recording was made during a demonstration of the phonograph held on June 22, 1878. It took place at the Steinberg Hat Shop in downtown St. Louis, the second building to the left in this photo, and was organized by Thomas Mason, a funny sketch writer who went by the pen name of I.X. Peck in the St. Louis Republican. Mason had bought one of Edison's phonographs back in April for $95.50, an incredible sum of money in 1878, and the voice is believed to belong to him. Just 3 weeks after the event, Mason died of sunstroke in Elston, Missouri, when a heat wave swept across the state. He was 49 years old. Since Leon Scott only died in spring the next year, that would make him the earliest recorded person to pass away. An even earlier tinfoil recording from 1877 has also been digitized. It's in the possession of the British Library, although exactly how it got there is unknown. The strip is accompanied by a letter from EMG Handmade Gramophones Limited, addressed to a Mrs. Morris Davis and dated the 16th of April 1937. She had asked EMG to transfer the recording, but they couldn't because, quote, "We have no method whatever of playing the recording, and we doubt very much whether any such method is in existence." On the transfer of the tinfoil, we can just about make out a woman's voice, but no words are discernible. The only clue about the subject of the recording comes from the letter's envelope, which bears the name Harriet Martineau. Martineau was an English writer and philosopher, renowned in her day as a journalist, political economist, slavery abolitionist, and feminist. But she died in 1876, crucially the year before Edison invented the phonograph, so the voice can't belong to her. To the best of my knowledge, however, this is the oldest playable recording of a recognizable female voice, and the woman is likely quoting from one of Martineau's works. The last recording I'd like to show you here was made much later than the ones we've listened to so far, but is in many ways the most remarkable. In 1889, Edison employee Theo Wangemann was traveling across Europe to exhibit a new, improved version of the phonograph that captured sound on wax instead of tinfoil. During the trip, he recorded various musical performances, as well as the voices of many famous historical figures. One of them was Field Marshal Helmut von Moltke the Elder, who was born in 1800, technically the last year of the 18th century. He is the earliest born person whose voice has survived. Now approaching his 90s, the old man had a long and distinguished career behind him. Regarded as one of the finest military minds of his generation, he had served as chief of staff for the Prussian army for 30 years. Under Moltke's leadership, the Prussians had proved victorious against Denmark, Austria, and France, paving the way for the unification of Germany. He stepped down from his post in 1888, retiring to his country estate at Kreisau in Silesia, now located in Poland. It was here that Wangemann met him a year later while traveling from Berlin to Vienna. Von Moltke was a stern man of few words, which led him to be called the Great Silent One. Known to be a considerable linguist, he was also described as silent in 7 languages. Despite this, of all the hundreds of millions of people born in the 18th century, his is the only voice that has yet to fade away, and perhaps it will continue to be heard for centuries to come. He is known to have made at least 4 recordings during Wangemann's visit, of which only 2 are preserved. In them he recited lines from Goethe's Faust and Shakespeare's Hamlet, and made the following congratulatory message to Edison. Note that he had to repeat his statement, having initially conflated the phonograph with the telephone, a mistake that he wasn't alone in making.
Kreisau am Schlesien am 21. Oktober 1889.
Helmut von Moltke died at his home in Berlin on the 24th of April 1891 after a short illness. He received a state funeral and thousands of troops led by the Kaiser escorted his casket to Berlin's Lehrter railroad station, from which it was transported to Silesia. He was interred in the family mausoleum on the Kreisau estate, which was plundered at the end of World War II. No one knows what happened to his remains after that, but like he foresaw, his voice still lives on.